Once upon a time, in the bustling town of Olu, there lived a beautiful young girl named Akudo. At the tender age of 14 years, Akudo had experienced more pain and sadness than many people face in their lifetime. She was a poor orphan, having lost her mother when she was only 4. After her mother's death, her father, heartbroken, remarried a woman named Auntie Chizzy, hoping to rebuild his shattered family. But fate was cruel. A few years later, Akudo's father also passed away, falling victim to a mysterious illness, leaving her alone in the world. Auntie Chizzy, now Akudo's only guardian, was a woman without compassion. She had 2 children of her own from a previous marriage, a daughter named Ihoma, who was also Akudo's age, and a son, Tobenna, who was 5 years younger. While Ihoma and Tobenna were given the best of everything, Akudo was treated like an outsider, no more than a servant in her own home. Akudo, have you finished cleaning the floors yet? And Chizzy's sharp voice would echo through the house each morning before the sun even had a chance to rise. I'm almost done, Auntie Chizzy, Akudo would reply softly, her hands red and raw from scrubbing. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. And Chizzy and her children would sit comfortably, their feet up, barking orders as Akudo did all the household chores. She cooked, cleaned, fetched water, and washed clothes, all while Ihoma and Tobenna lounged around lazily. Why is she so slow, Momsy? Ihoma would say with a sneer, tossing her long braids over her shoulder. Because she's lazy, and Chizzy replied, casting a cold glance at Akudo. If your father were still alive, he would be so ashamed of you. At night, when the chores were done, Aunt Chizzy would give her the smallest portion of food, while Aunt Chizzy and her children ate richly. Akudo ate only scraps. As time passed, things became difficult for the family, and Chizzy had sold out all Akudo's father's properties, and so Akudo was pushed off the street to go earn more money. You know that this my small shop cannot cater for all my children and you. You need to make yourself useful, she bellowed. You will come to the shop every morning, eh? After your chores, you come and pick items from the shop that you will go and sell at the park. Do you understand? Akudo nodded softly, and so it continued. While Aunt Chizzy's children dressed for school with their bellies full, Akudo would have to do all the washing and cleaning in the house and still go on hawking on an empty stomach. One hot afternoon, as the sun began to set up over the bustling park, Akudo was hawking oranges for Auntie Chizzy. She hadn't eaten since morning and her stomach gnawed with hunger. But she couldn't return home until she had sold every last orange. If she did, Aunt Chizzy would refuse her dinner, and tonight would be no different. By 5 p.m., her legs were trembling from weakness, and the hunger in her belly made her feel fainty. As she walked through the rows of cars, her eyes caught sight of a man walking on a vehicle just ahead. Next to him, on a small wooden bench, was a half-eaten loaf of bread. The sight of it made Akudo's stomach twist with longing. Desperation overcame her. She wasn't sure where the courage came from, but she found herself walking towards him, hunger giving her the strength to speak. Lisa, she said softly, her voice trembling, I'm very hungry and I haven't eaten anything today. Could I have some bread? The man startled, looked up from the car. He was in his mid-20s, his hands covered in oil and grease from a long day's work. This was Mr. Ezudu, a kind roadside mechanic known for fixing cars at the park. He glanced at Akudo, seeing the tired look in her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. Without hesitation, he picked up the bread and handed it to her. Here, take it, he said, his voice gentle, and have some water too. He quickly passed her a sachet of pure water. Akudo gratefully accepted the bread, her hands shaking as she tore into the bread, eating slowly despite the hunger. Mr. Ezudo watched her for a moment, his curiosity piqued. Something about the way she carried herself didn't match her circumstances. How old are you? He asked after a moment. I'm 14, Akudo said between bites. But I'll be 15 next month. Mr. Ezudo raised his eyebrows. You seem older. You've got a sharp mind for someone your age, Akudo blushed, not used to compliments. Thank you, sir, she whispered. As she finished the bread, Mr. Ezudo continued. I've seen how you bargain with customers around here. You handle them better than some of the grown women in the market. Why are you out here selling oranges when you could be doing something more? Akudo hesitated, unsure of what to say. It's for my aunt, she finally replied. She sends me here every day to sell. I have to finish everything she gives, or I won't get to it. Mr. Izudo frowned, his brow furrowing in thoughts. What about your parents? Do they know you're so clever? You seem like someone who's good with numbers. Are you good at math? Akudo felt a strange warmth through her. No one had ever noticed her abilities before, especially not Aunt Chizzy, who only called her useless. I do like math, she admitted shyly. I'm good with numbers, but I haven't been to school in a long time. Mr. Izudo shook his head. Shy. So sorry, what a pity, he muttered, more to himself than to her. A girl like you deserves better. From that day on, Mr. Izudo kept a close eye on Akudo whenever she came to the park. He would offer her small gifts, sometimes a loaf of bread, other times snacks or a piece of fruit. He admired her wit, her cleverness, and her ability to navigate the tough world around her with grace and intelligence. Despite her difficult life, Akudo's spirit remained bright. You really shouldn't be selling oranges here, Mr. Izudo told her one afternoon, watching her expertly bargain with a stubborn customer. There's so much more you could do. Akudo smiled faintly but didn't respond. Though she felt the warmth of his kindness, she knew she was trapped in Antichi's world. Weeks passed and Mr. Izudo became more invested in her future. He began to ask her about her dreams, her life beyond the park. Have you ever thought of doing something else? He asked one day as they sat together after they finished their sales. I don't have many choices, Akudo replied, staring at the ground. But I dream of going to school again. I dream of becoming a doctor someday, she said. Mr. Izudo looked at Akudo with a seriousness that caught her off guard. What if I could help you with school? He said, his voice soft but firm. You deserve a better life, Akudo. You're too bright to be stuck here. Akudo froze, her heart racing. School? She almost whispered as if saying the word too loudly might shatter the possibility. Yes, Mr. Ozudo leaned in, his eyes filled with sincerity. I'll cover your school fees, buy your books, everything. You shouldn't be settling on the streets when you could be learning, dreaming. Just tell your aunt, and if she doesn't agree, you can come live with me. Akudo's mind raced. Auntie Chizzy will be furious. The thought of even bringing it up made her stomach churn. But she will never agree, Akudo mumbled, fear creeping into her voice. She depends on what I earn. It helps the family. Mr. Isudo sighed, his expression softening. You are more than just a way for her to make money, Akudo. You deserve more. At least try talking to her. That evening, Akudo hurried home. Isudo's words replaying in her mind. He had brought everything she had to sell that day, giving her the rare luxury of going home early. She paced around her small room, her heart pounding, searching for the courage to speak. Finally, she just walked into the kitchen without thinking. She blurted out, Auntie, I want to go back to school. And Chizzy stopped mid-air in her cooking pot and turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. School? Who is giving this one funny ideas? Who will do all the chores in the house if you go to school, eh? Who will give you food? Or you think money falls from the sky? I could still help around the house, Akudo's voice trailed off, but Auntie Chizzy cut her off. And what do you even know about school, eh? What's in that head of yours besides foolish dreams? Leave books for smart people, Joe Akudo. School. You're better off on the street, she said, her tone filled with contempt. Akudo's heart sank. She had hoped, prayed that maybe, just maybe, Auntie Chizzy would see her desire, her potential. But it was clear Auntie Chizzy would never let her go. Tears welled up in Akudo's eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing herself a stand tall. But I want more, she whispered, almost to herself. I want a chance. And Chizzy sneered, turning back to the pot. Chance? There is no chance for people like you, Akudo. You should be grateful you have a roof over your head. If not for the love I have for your father, I would have thrown you out of this house long time ago. That night, Akudo could not sleep. Her heart was heavy as she replayed her aunt's bitter words in her head. How much she hated this life. Mama, why did you leave? She cried. She remembered the promise Mr. Izudo made to her that she could come to live with her if her aunt refused. She had to choose between staying and continuing her daily struggles or following her dreams. She made the difficult decision to leave her aunt's home. The next morning, after everyone had left the house, she packed her few belongings and fled. Akudo moved into Mr. Ezudo's house, which was a neighboring town. Ezudo enrolled her in a secondary school, a bit far from the hometown, so that Auntie Chizzy and her children wouldn't track her. It wasn't easy adjusting to her new life, but Akudo threw herself into her studies, determined to succeed. She had been given a second chance and she wasn't going to waste it. At school, Akudo flourished. Her intelligence and dedication quickly earned the attention of her teachers, and soon she began to make new friends. For the first time in years, her dreams didn't seem so distant. It wasn't long before she caught the eye of a local politician who, impressed by her academic excellence, offered her a partial scholarship that covered her school fees. Life was finally turning around for Akudo, and everything seemed to be falling into place. 4 years has passed, and Akudo had become one of the brightest students in her school. Now in SS3, she was preparing for the most important exam of her life, her senior school certificate examination. But as her academic success continued to soar, something else was changing: her relationship with Mr. Ezudo. Ezudo had always been a supportive, almost brotherly figure in Akudo's life. He was the one who had believed in her when no one else did, the one who had helped her when she was at her lowest. But as Akudo blossomed into a beautiful and intelligent young woman, his feelings for her began to shift. She was 19 now, and Ezudo couldn't help but admire her strength, her ambition, her beauty. The admiration that was once innocent started to evolve into something more. At first, Akudo didn't notice the change. She was focused on her studies, determined to ace her exams and make something out of her life. But soon, she began to feel the weight of Izudo's growing affection. His compliments became more frequent, his attention more intense. He showered her with gifts, small tokens of his affection, and though Akudo was flattered at first, the attention soon became overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly long day, Izudo's emotions got the better of him. He approached Akudo with a look she had never seen before, one filled with longing. Akudo, he began, his voice soft but insistent. I love you. I've loved you for a long time. Akudo froze, her heart racing. She had always seen Ezudo as a mentor, a protector, someone who had always been there when she had no one. This wasn't what she expected, especially not now when her mind was consumed with her upcoming exams. Uncle Ezudo, I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I appreciate everything you've done for me. I really do, but I'm not ready for this now. I want to finish my school first, focus on my future. We can talk about everything else later. Please, Uncle, understand. Please, my exams are in a few days. But Mr. Izudo didn't understand. His face darkened with hurt, rejection setting into his eyes. He had sacrificed so much for her, and now he believed he deserved her love in return. The days that followed were filled with tension. Akudo, resolute in her determination to succeed, poured all her energy into preparing for her exams, refusing to let anything or anyone distract her from her goals. Then one night, everything changed. Akudo was in her room, studying late into the night. She was writing her SSC exams at the time and was preparing for the final paper when Ezudo came home after having several drinks with his friends. The alcohol clouded his judgment, and the emotions he had been bottling up for so long exploded into a terrible decision. He entered her room, his steps unsteady, his gaze filled with something dark and dangerous. Uncle Ezudo, what are you doing in my room by this time? Akudo asked, sensing something was terribly wrong. But Ezudo didn't answer. He moved towards her, his voice slurred but determined. I love you, Akudo. You know I do. You're mine. Akudo backed away, fear gripping her heart. Please, Uncle Suso, don't do this, please. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. In that moment, he crossed a line that could never be undone. He forced himself on her, ignoring her cries, her desperation. The next morning, the weight of his actions hit him like a hammer. Guilt consumed him, but the damage was done. Akudo, devastated and broken, couldn't face her exams that day. The betrayal was too much to bear. I trusted Mr. Zudo, the one person who had promised her a better life, only to be shattered by his actions. She locked herself away, drowning in the overwhelming sense of loss, loss of trust, loss of innocence, loss of her dreams. Weeks passed in silence and Akudo struggled to find a way forward. But then, the unthinkable happened. She discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like a ton of bricks. The future she had worked so hard for, her dreams of becoming a doctor, seemed to slip further and further out of reach. Izudo, realizing the gravity of what he had done, promised to take care of the child. He swore to make things right, though Akudo knew deep down that nothing could fix what had been broken. Still, they went to the hospital for a routine checkup, hoping to at least prepare for the future. But fate dealt them another cruel blow. Both Akudo and Ezudo carried the AS genotype, meaning that their child had a high risk of being born with sickle cell disease. The doctor's words were blunt. I advise against having this child. The complications could be severe. Akudo sat in stunned silence as the walls of her life crumbled around her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, seemed to be slipping away, leaving her trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The days after Akudo revealed her pregnancy were filled with tension. Izudo had been distant at first, but one evening he broke the silence. Akudo, Izudo said, pacing the room like a man being chased by his own thoughts. His voice was heavy, almost apologetic, but there was something cold beneath it. I don't mean to hurt you more than I already have, but we cannot go through this, he said, pacing and looking at her, his eyes hard as if already bracing for a fight. Our child will suffer. You know now. You must end this pregnancy. Akudo's heart stopped for a second, disbelief washing over her. What? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. You want me to get rid of our baby? Ezudo's expression darkened. It's for the best. This child will grow up in pain and suffering. We don't need this kind of burden. Akudo stood up, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach, as if shielding her unborn child from the cruelty of his words. No, I won't do that, she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. This is our child. Our child! Ezudo, I will not harm it. Ezudo rubbed his face with his hands, his frustration boiling over. Akudo, Akudo, you're not thinking clearly. He was pleading now, desperation lacing every word. If this child is born, it won't have a proper life. We'll be trapped, forever tied to a mistake. Akudo's heart shattered with each word, but she stood firm. A mistake, she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. This is not a mistake. This is a life, our life, and I won't destroy it just because you're afraid. Days passed and Izudo grew even more restless. His desperation turned to anger, and the man Akudo once loved and respected had become a total stranger. One evening, after yet another heated argument, his voice dropped cold and final. Akudo, if you won't do this, then I won't help you anymore. You would have to be on your own from now henceforth, he said, his voice like ice. Akudo stood in stunned silence, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this side of him before. The man who had once promised to love her, protect her, was now threatening to abandon her at her most vulnerable state. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that she didn't know what to do. She couldn't stay. She didn't know what Mr. Ezudo had in mind. Without a word, he packed a small bag, just a few clothes, and the little money she had saved up. The life she thought she would have with Ezudo was over. That night, she fled, her heart breaking with each step as she walked away from the man she thought would save him. When she arrived at Auntie Chizzy's house, her legs were trembling, her spirit crushed, but there was no welcome waiting for her. You foolish girl! After 4 years, Auntie Chizzy hissed, her face twisted with fury as she saw Akudo standing in the doorway, belly swollen with pregnancy. You live here without permission and now you return pregnant? You're a disgrace! Auntie Chizzy's cruelty, already unbearable, became worse with Akudo's return. Her punishment began. You think you can come back here with a bastard in your belly, eh? And expect mercy? Auntie Chizzy spat one morning as Akudo struggled to sweep the floor, her body aching with the weight of her growing child. You will work harder than you ever did before. Maybe that will teach you to think before shaming this family. Akudo's body grew even weaker as the months passed. Auntie Chiji's stacks grew also harsher, scrubbing the floors on her hands and knees, carrying heavy loads, cooking meals for everyone while she barely ate herself. There was no compassion, no pity, not from Auntie Chizzy nor her children, Ihoma and Tobenna, who delighted in mocking Akudo at every opportunity. So much for wanting to go to school, Ihoma sneered one evening. Now look at you, pregnant and alone. You've ruined your life. Akudo's only comfort was the life growing inside of her. Despite the cruelty, the hunger, and pain, she held on to hope for her child. Each night as she lay on the cold floor with barely any food, she whispered to her unborn baby, promising it a better life. But hope was fragile. One fateful night, after weeks of exhaustion and malnutrition, Akudo's body gave up as she was scrubbing the floor. Her vision blurred. The room spun and then everything went dark. She collapsed, cradling her baby, feeling the sharp pain tear through her. She knew in that moment that something was terribly wrong with her child. When she awoke, it was at the hospital bed. Auntie Chizzy, though furious at trouble Akudo had caused, had rushed her there, fearful of being blamed for a death in her house. The doctors managed to save Akudo's life, but the baby was gone. Akudo felt the loss deep in her bones. She cried for days, her heart shattered. The grief was like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. But even in her grief, something shifted within her. She had survived. When Akudo returned to Chizzy's house, her body was frail, but her spirit, though wounded, was not broken. Auntie Chizzy's cruelty continued, but it no longer had the same effect. Akudo was numb to her words. The loss of her child had brought her to the brink of despair, but had also given her a strange, quiet strength. One evening, after finishing her endless chores, she sat alone by the window staring at the moonlight sky. Her hands trembled from the exhaustion, but her mind was clear. She whispered to herself, I will not be broken. I will survive, and I will find a way to live without the chains of cruelty and loss. It was a quiet vow, but it was the seed of something bigger. Akudo spent days in quiet contemplation as her body healed. Though the weight of grief pressed on, she found herself grasping at the tiniest thread of hope. Life had been relentlessly cruel, but something deep inside her refused to give in. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the rain pour down, Auntie Chizzy's voice cut through the air. Are you still sitting there like a useless log? Auntie Chizzy sneered. There's work to do. Oh. You can't live here for free. Go fetch water before it gets too dark. Akudo rose slowly, her body still weak from the miscarriage. She took the bucket and quietly made her way to the well. As the bucket lowered into the water, she stared at her reflection, her face thinner, eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but something flickered behind them. Strength. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Akudo! Ihoma called out, walking towards her with Tobina trailing behind. The expressions were snug, as always. So, how does it feel to be the villager's biggest disgrace? Ihoma taunted, her voice dripping with malice. You thought you were special, didn't you? Now look at you. Pregnant, and now even your bastard child is gone. Akudo didn't even flinch. She continued to draw the water, her silence unnerving Ihoma. You are too proud to even defend yourself, eh? Tobina added, stepping closer. No man will want you now. You have ruined your life all on your own. This time, Akudo met their eyes. I may have fallen, she said softly, but firmly. I will rise again. You can mock me, belittle me, but you don't have the power to define my future. Ihoma scolded, her face twisting with irritation. We'll see how long that defiance lasts, she muttered, storming off. Tobina stayed a moment longer, his eyes narrowing. You see, Akudo, people like you never escape the dirt. Remember that. As he left, Akudo stood still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But she wasn't the same girl they had once taunted. Inside, something had shifted. A week passed and Akudo continued her daily chores, her resolve growing stronger each day, despite Auntie Chizzy's cruelty and the mockery of Ihoma and Tobena. Akudo had begun to make plans. She wasn't sure how she would live, but she knew she couldn't stay forever. One evening, as she was clearing up the compound, a familiar figure approached. It was Mr. Ezudo. He stood at a distance, his face a mixture of guilt and hesitation. Akudo, his voice wavered, but she didn't turn to face him. What do you want? She asked coldly. I came to apologize, Ezudo said softly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I made a terrible mistake, but I want to make things right. At this, Akudo finally turned to him, her eyes blazing with anger. You think you can make things right? She snapped. You think words can undo what you did? You took everything from me, Ezudo. My innocence, my child, my future. Ezudo swallowed hard, the weight of her words crushing him. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, I can't change what happened, but I want to help you now. I've spoken to a friend in the city. There's a woman who can help you. She's willing to take you in. You can start your life afresh from there. Akudo's heart rests. A chance to live, to start afresh. But she didn't trust Ezudo, not anymore. And why should I believe you, she asked, narrowing her eyes. Why would you help me now? Because it's the least I can do, Ezudo replied, his voice breaking. I've ruined your life enough. Please, let me help you. Please, let me help you leave this place. Akudo was silent for a long moment. Could she trust him again? Was this her way out of another trap? But deep down, she knew she couldn't stay here forever. And Chizzy's cruelty, the weight of the lost child, it was just too much to bear. She exhaled slowly. I don't trust you. Leave me alone. That night, Akudo sat awake in her small room. The older woman was snoring loudly, unaware of the turmoil raging in Akudo's heart. Could she leave everything behind? Could she trust that this opportunity was real? The next morning, as she prepared breakfast, Auntie Chizzy barked at her as usual. Hurry up, you this girl. You're slower than a tortoise. Akudo ignored her. Her mind was somewhere. She needed to make a decision. Just as she was about to answer, a loud knock came at the door. Auntie Chizzy turned, frowning. Who could that be? Akudo opened the door to find Ezudo standing there again, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a tall, dignified woman with sharp, discerning eyes that seemed to pierce through every layer of Akudo's soul. This is Mr. Okocha, Ezudo introduced him. You remember her? The proprietor of your school. She came to my house yesterday insisting on meeting you herself. Akudo's heart skipped a bit. Mrs. Okocha. I've heard her name countless times in school, but I never met her in person. They always said she lived abroad, she muttered, still processing the unexpected visit. Mrs. Okocha stepped forward, her presence commanding attention as her gaze locked onto Akudo's. Yes, I just returned to Nigeria to check on things at the school. And I've heard quite a lot about you, young lady, she said, her voice both firm and warm. The remarkable thing is, everything everyone has said about you is good. Your teachers, even the students all say the same. You are the best in your set, and you've earned it. I came personally to congratulate you. Akudo's eyes widened, unsure whether to speak or simply absorb the moment. As is our tradition, Mr. Okocha continued, you are entitled to a fully paid scholarship to study any course of your choice in any country abroad. Your SSC results were outstanding, save for one language subject you didn't write. But that's nothing to worry about. It won't affect your future. Your path is clear, Akudo. Just then, Auntie Chizzy stormed into the room, her face twisted with fury. And who are you people? She barked. Akudo isn't going anywhere. She has work to do here. Akudo turned to face her, calm yet resolute, her voice steady. I won't stay here, I'll let you destroy what's left of my life. Auntie Chizzy's face flushed with anger. You ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, eh? Without another word, Akudo looked to Mrs. Okocha, who gave her an encouraging nod. With a heart pounding in her chest, but a mind set on freedom, Akudo stepped out of the door with nothing but the clothes on her back. She didn't even look back. This was her moment and she wouldn't let it slip away. Years later, Akudo returned to Nigeria, a transformed woman, now Dr. Akudo, a highly respected doctor who had made a name for herself abroad. She was no longer the timid girl who had once cowered about by Auntie Chizzy. She had grown into a powerful and compassionate woman, her confidence radiating like the African sun. As she stepped out of the car that brought her back to the town, Akudo looked around at the familiar landscape. It was the same town that had once tried to break her spirit, but now she was different, stronger and wiser. She walked past the market where the woman once whispered about her. They were silent now, their eyes wide with recognition and respect. Akudo's first stop was Auntie Chizzy's house. The years hadn't been kind to her stepmother, who looked older, frailer and as bitter as ever. When Auntie Chizzy opened the door and saw Akudo standing there, her face twisted in surprise. You, Auntie Chizzy stammered. What are you doing here? I came to see you, Akudo said calmly, stepping into the house. Her eyes scanned the room as she noticed the tattered furniture and the worn-out walls. And I also came to ask you something. Where is the money my mother left for my education? Auntie Chizzy's face paled, her eyes darting nervously. What are you talking about? Who told you about it? You know exactly what I'm talking about, Akudo said, her voice cold. You took the money my mother saved for me, didn't you? You spent it all on yourself, while I suffered. And Chizzy opened her mouth to deny it, but the guilt in her eyes betrayed her. I had no choice. Times were hard, and I had to take care of the family. Akudo stared at her for a long moment, then let out a sigh. I should hate you for everything you've done for me. she said, her voice soft but firm. But I don't want to waste my energy on hatred. I've come too far to let bitterness consume me. And Chizzy looked down, her hands trembling. For the first time, she seemed to understand the depth of her cruelty. Please forgive me, she said, looking at Akudo with faint sympathy. Akudo looked back at her. I've forgiven you a long time ago. I can't bear the burden of holding grudges against you. With that, Akudo stormed out of the house. The next day, Akudo sought out for Mr. Ezudo, the man who had been a friend when she had no one. He was still struggling, his dreams of owning a mechanic shop buried under the weight of poverty. Without hesitation, Akudo decided to help him. She used her resources to help Ezudo establish a flourishing mechanic workshop in the heart of the town. The next few months saw a transformation in the town. She built a state-of-the-art medical facility and established scholarships for orphans, giving them the opportunity she once fought so hard for. She made sure no child would ever endure what she had, trapped by circumstance and cruelty. As for Auntie Chizzy and her children, they were left with nothing but bitterness. They watched as Akudo, the girl they once mocked, become a beacon of hope for the entire community. On the day of the clinic's grand opening, Akudo stood at the entrance, cutting the ribbon with a smile. The sun shone brightly as if blessing her new beginning. People gathered around, clapping and cheering, proud of the woman she had become. Miss Okocha was also present. You've done so well, Akudo, she said softly. Akudo nodded, her heart full of gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much. As the clinic opened its doors, Akudo looked towards the horizon. She had come far from the scared, broken girl who once knelt on Auntie Chizzy's floors. Now, she was a doctor, a healer, and a force for good. And she had finally written her own story. The end. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. I hope you enjoyed this story. This story teaches us that dreams always come true if you put the effort. You would notice that Akudo determined in her heart that she was going to succeed no matter what. And she finally succeeded. Dreams come true. Thank you so much for watching. I would like to hear your thoughts in the comment section about what you think about this story. What would you have done differently, especially when you found out that your auntie was using the money your parents gave you for your education for something else? Would you have acted differently? I would like to hear your thoughts at the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.